Hey everybody, my name is Jason. I'm a pastor at Home Church. And
And my name is David. I'm a pastor at Woodbury United Methodist Church.
we are going through the I am statements of Jesus in the Gospel of John. And we've done several weeks. If you haven't gotten to join us before, you can go back and watch those on our Facebook pages, I think, and maybe YouTube.
Yep.
But this week we're going to be in John chapter 10, and David's going to read this. So,
All right. Yeah, and we're starting at verse 7 here. We're going to read verses 7 through 10 in John chapter 10. So Jesus spoke again. I assure you that I am the gate of the sheep. All who come before me were thieves and outlaws, but the sheep didn't listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief enters only to steal, kill, and destroy. But I came so they could have life. Indeed, so that they could live life to the fullest. The word of the Lord.
thanks be to God.
So, yeah, this is one of those passages that for me, on reading it, and probably for some of you listening right now as we read that out loud, it makes me realize how much I don't get it right away. Like this image, it's such a simple one at first. It's like, oh, I'm the gate. And I think that I get it right away. And then I read, and like the next line will be like, wait, no, maybe I thought he was saying something different than he did. And part of it is this there's a lot of metaphors going on here. Like this is in the context of John 10, where Jesus is saying like that he's the shepherd. There's the shepherd of the sheep. There's a guard at the gate. And then there's this thief. And then he goes on and he is the good shepherd. And other parts in John, Jesus is the lamb and he's a sheep. And it's like you get all these images all here in one thing. And we were talking just a few minutes ago with Jason. I really liked, we both latched on to verse 6 right before where we started reading, where those who heard Jesus use this analogy didn't understand what he was saying. It's like, oh, well, that's good. I'm not the first one who gets a little confused as I'm reading through this. And yeah, it's reassuring to be in the company of many other people who are not understanding, because it's such a challenge. Like we're preachers and we're supposed to be confident in the word, and we're supposed to know exactly what it is we're talking about and be experts in all this. And this is one where I first read it, I'm like, I don't know what Jesus is saying. And I know he's saying more than what I'm getting, but I'm not getting it yet, is kind of where I am when I first read this. And so it's exciting to me to get drawn in a little bit further as we do read it. But right up front, I'm like, nope, I don't get it yet.
Yeah, and most of the time when I encounter that in the Bible, it's contextual things, or I assume it's contextual things. It's, we're a couple of thousand years away, several thousand miles away, completely different cultures. But the first hearers, they're religious experts who live in the same place. And so they're still not getting it. And so that is pretty encouraging. And usually when I'm in this spot where I just don't know the whole, there are lots of images, lots of people. You've got thieves and robbers, you've got strangers, lots going on. I try to figure out the things that I can figure out
Uh-huh.
and identifying those. And one of the things that I had not remembered from this passage was how connected it seems to be to the previous chapter. And we've talked in previous weeks about how in a lot of the I am statements, there is a story with it. Last week's was the exception of that, but you look at the bread of life and it's around the feeding of the 5,000, and
Yeah.
the light of the world is he's healing this person who's born blind and then saying, I am the light of the world. And then so one of the questions I was asking it is, which story does this fit with? And it seems to fit with that story of the man born blind. And now he can see, but it's the second part of the story. It's not just the healing of it, but it's the Pharisees' interaction with the man after that. And they're just almost upset that he's healed and that Jesus did it. And so they're trying to ask him questions and figure out a way in which Jesus cannot be a prophet or certainly not Son of God.
Yeah.
And in that section saying, "You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us?" And they threw him out of the synagogue. And so it's on the heels of that. They throw him out of the synagogue that Jesus is saying, "I am the gate. I am the door." And it seems to me he's saying, you're trying to be the gate, you're trying to be the door, and keeping people out, and that's not your job. That's
Yeah.
my job. And Dave, you were having some insight on the gate part, and just say that.
Yeah. Well, that, like, I really like the way you were telling that story first, referring to the man born blind, because like we think of, oh, that's the title we give it. It's like, oh, Jesus heals the man born blind. And so we think that, oh, this is a whole story about somebody being able to see again. And it is, but then most of the story, it's a full chapter at least,
Yeah,
is about like the conflict that happens after. And that's really the story there. It's like him healing a guy. It's like, it's just matter of course. By then he's healing people. But then it's like, oh yeah, how do we respond to God's work? Um, and yeah, the religious leaders are like, we are in charge of it. And then Jesus comes in and he's saying like, no, I'm the gate, like you were saying. And it's like, what difference does that make? Like if Jesus is the gate instead of somebody else, like what difference does that make? And the difference here with the man born blind is like, if these other religious leaders are the gate, he's getting tossed out and they're a closed gate. And that's kind of like when I think of a gate, when I hear that image, that's immediately what I picture is a closed gate for
yeah,
whatever reason. And like the latch, kind of that little metal latch in the bar. And when it goes in, it like hooks over it and it's hooked and the gate is closed. And that's what I picture when I think of a gate. But really, it's like, oh, the gate is the part of the fence that's open. And the way Jesus talks about it is like people are entering through the gate. So it has to be an open gate when he's talking about himself. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They come in and they go out. Like that's not a closed gate. This is something that's open and life-giving, and it's a way forward and a way in and out. And so if Jesus is the gate, this man who had been blind is now being brought further in, and he's given the gift of sight, but he's also invited into the community in the full life of the people, full pasture of God, where if other religious leaders have their way, he's kept out and he's pushed even further out. And so it's like, yeah, who's going to be the gate? Ends up saying like, is the gate going to be closed or is it going to be open? Is it a way that you can go through, or is it a way to keep people out? And yeah, that's one of those, like he's talking about people before, he's talking into his own situation in this really specific thing. But also like, I hear that word today. It's like, what kind of are we, you and I are both pastors. We have these leadership roles in the church formally designated to us by our job titles. And it's like, oh, are we going to use that to like keep people out, or to try to allow Jesus to play the role that he's trying to play and like lead people in, especially if he's there and he's shepherding people and he's the good shepherd and he's leading this big flock of sheep. And he says that like when he has gathered all his sheep, he goes before them and they follow him. Like he has all these sheep, and that's like, how many of those sheep are we blocking from entrance who should be coming all the way in because Jesus is leading them? And like it's a kind of a challenging word for me.
Yeah, and it even more so towards the end of it. There's the John 10:10. I have always heard this, and probably even said this. That talks about the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, and have always heard that this is about Satan, that,
uh,
this is about the enemy. And but the only thing is, there is no other indication in this passage that it is, when it's talking about those who are stealing, the robbers who come to steal. It seems to be religious leaders and people who have set themselves up as, come follow me. And Jesus is saying, those who came before me, those with that posture, that they're just trying to steal and kill and destroy. And I've come that they may have life and have it to the full. And when you read it in the context of that story beforehand, Jesus is, he sees the need of this man who has had this need his entire life, and his response to it is to heal him, to bring him sight, to life fully. And they may not have had those healing gifts, but their response even to his healing is frustration and anger and throwing him out. This is a guy who's been on the outskirts of society already, he was able to eat because he begged for money, and he's healed. And so Jesus, that's a physical healing. It's also an economic healing. It's a new identity in a lot of ways. And they're still pushing him out and sending him out. And so it's interesting that the thieves who are here to steal and kill and destroy, they're people. And that's hard to hear. That how are we, who are we in this story? Are we people who are standing in the way of other people, are looking at, thieves are looking for what they can get from other people without the investment, without paying for it? Are we looking at what we can get from other people? Or are we looking at the need of other people and what we have to give? And Jesus is clearly the good shepherd. He's the one who cares about people, who is laying his life down for them. And that would be a better model for us.
Right. Well, and that to me is like that's how this chapter ends, is with talking about the good, or at least the section of the chapter ends with the focus on Jesus as the good shepherd. And that is such a clarifying part of it. Like, even if other parts get a little confusing, or what does this metaphor mean here? Like that one of Jesus as the shepherd, who's so good, he's willing to even lay down his own life for the sheep. That's just as clear as it gets, especially with like Good Friday and Easter coming up. It's like, oh, that's who Jesus is. And if anything else gets us confused about who he is, like, we can keep looking to that. It's the core of our faith. And in this story, it's like the core image of the story, that, oh, if we can't quite figure out what it means to be the gate, or what's the opposite of the gate, like the shepherd, that's clear, and let that interpret it. And I kind of think too, like, as we were talking, that sometimes our religious leaders, and I'll include you in this along with me, and plenty of other leaders, are like, we sometimes live in ways that like confuse people about who Jesus is, because we're not fully upholding our call. We're not being fully faithful in the way that you would have us be. And some religious leaders, and I'm not including you in this, but have done so egregiously that it really is like giving people a very distorted picture. And there might start to be that confusion of like, oh, Jesus is like something that I wouldn't want to be a part of. But like, this image of who Jesus is like, he's the good shepherd, and anything that confuses that is just not him. And it's just, we can like push it aside and say, no, that's the opposite of who Jesus is. It's not him. And any like, if we get those points where we're confused, or like we're angry about how Jesus is being displayed to us, it's like anything that's not showing him as the good shepherd, like, it's just not worth our while. It's not right.
The parts in this section that are the most difficult to understand what he's talking about is the other people, the clarifying metaphors you're using about himself are clear. And,
Yeah.
thinking about God, creator of all things, we can't, with our human minds, comprehend God in that sense. But the character of God is actually probably more simple to understand than human characters or normal human characters. Jesus was human too. But just thinking about, when I look at my life, it's a lot more complicated in some ways than
Yeah.
Jesus' life. I have different desires and motivations, and the story of my life is not as straight as his, and so that, as you were talking, I just had that thought, like, that's something about Jesus. I mean, he's beyond comprehension in some ways, but also really single-minded and simple in his intentions, and clear in his goodness. And that's a really powerful thought, that, like, he's, in those sense, more single than we are, more sinful, although certainly more deep and more profound as well. Any last thoughts?
No, I think that seems like a good spot to end to me. I think, yeah, putting the focus where it needs to be. That's about right.
That's right. Well, thank you, Dave, and thank you all for joining us this week. We'll be back next week.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to it already.
Me too.
All right. God bless y'all.